Fiero back in the garage. We're going to put it up on jack stands. Going to remove the front two wheels and the hubs, or the rotors and the hubs. Want to grind off. I'll show you when I get to it. There's some excess metal there that needs to come off. Also, while it's up on jack stands, we're going to drain the coolant and replace all of the hoses in the coolant system, and then we'll also replace the belts, which will require removing that passenger rear wheel and the rear wheel well to get access to do that. So I had help from a friend, Henry, this evening. He took this all apart. We removed the rotors from both sides, and he went and ground off the little thin metal. It turned out really nicely. Unfortunately, I didn't get a picture of it. While he was doing that, I was removing and draining coolant, and removing the hoses for replacement. There's an old one next to a new one there. It came off there. Underneath here, there's a pair, new and old. They're the lower return. We've got a cap and a strainer, hose clamps. Working back here, I removed that end of the hose. The other end is going to be interesting. And then up here, I got this one loose off of that fitting, and the other one is buried down in there, but I can get to it with a socket. I haven't hunted down this side, but what I did discover while I was underneath, I guess I'm assuming it's over here, maybe it's not, maybe it's just they're all on this side, which kind of makes sense from like a front engine, but we'll see. Anyway, while I was underneath, I discovered a mess. The boot, the CV joint boot, failed, and it spewed CV grease all over that surface, all over this surface, facing back this way, all over the back of the muffler. So I wiped most of that off as best I could and ordered a replacement axle, because I'm sure this is the original, and who knows how long it's been flinging the grease, although I didn't notice it when I got the car. So I guess I'll just consider myself lucky that it came through when it did, and I found it and discovered it and so forth. So one of the things I was looking at, based on some comments about the sway bar facing, we'll call it facing forward. And by the way, I am going to grind off the end of, let's see if I get my finger, yeah, I'm going to grind the end off of that end link bolt once I make sure that the nuts are as tight as I want them. Same thing on the other side. Anyway, they said that this point of connection should be facing forward, ahead of the wheels. Well, I don't see a surface where that can be done. The beam on the cradle that would have gone to, or maybe in this part it's just on the frame, is too far apart. So it would have to be an entirely different designed sway bar. You can't just take the one off the front. So that being said, I'm just gonna run the risk that it doesn't break at the end links and drag, causing the rear end to come up. So anyway, onward and forward. Oh, and in preparation for exchanging them, or putting in a new half shaft, and also in preparation for the belts, I've removed the fender well lining pieces. Those are all the fasteners for that. So in order to get the shaft out, that nut has got to come out, and then this has to swing out in order to free that end from the hub, the spline in the hub. So in order to do that, I've removed one of these. I've got to remove the other one. Ideally, I'd come up with a way of marking. What I'm going to do is just attempt with a marker to indicate how this fit together, because sometimes there's play in there. This one doesn't look like it's got play, though. It looks like it's pretty much line to line. All right, we'll mark it anyway. Here's where I'm at with this. I ended up removing the hub, which was easy. It was just three bolts holding it onto the spindle. I thought that would give me enough clearance, that and removing those, to be able to push the end of the axle back through that opening, but that is not the case. However, in the manual it says I should have enough clearance now to pop that end out of the transmission, and then that will allow the whole thing to be loose. The other option I have is to remove the nut at the end of this shaft, which normally would be called a tie rod end, but in this case, because it's fixed, it is, well, we'll call it like a toe-in adjuster. Anyway, I can remove that and not affect the alignment, and that would free the whole spindle to tilt even further. But I'll go ahead and do what the manual says and pry that out of the transmission. I thought I had recorded some of the rest of this installation, but I didn't. So I'll explain briefly what I did. I put the wheels and tires on the driver's side, took that side off of the jack stands. I raised the passenger side as high as I felt was safe, put it up on my bigger jack stands, and that with the intention of trying to keep as much of the transmission oil in the transmission case. So with that, then I also took and was able to pry the end of the CV joint, the spline, out of the transaxle, and discovered that there was not enough span left to get it out. So I did, as I mentioned before, which was remove the nut on the end of that fixed tie rod, and that allowed me to tilt the spindle just far enough to be able to work the old axle out and install the new one. And the installation of the new one was just the reverse. I did lose probably less than a quarter of a cup of fluid, but I'll go back and check that once the car is all back down on four wheels and level. So, getting that hose off of that, where is it? Off of that, there we go, off of that fitting was unpleasant. I basically just had to cut it, which I should have done from the beginning, but I was trying to be, I don't know, frugal, whatever. It's off. Also off is the AC compressor belt, which I thought would be out of the way and would help. All I did to remove that was loosen that nut up there, which caused the whole compressor to rotate, and that freed up enough to just barely get that belt off. So now we'll move on to the alternator water pump belt, which is supposed to be loosen that bolt, and we'll see what happens. There may be other bolts that need to be loosened, but that appears to be the one to put tension on the belt. I don't know if this is necessary because I can't just look. They don't date code hoses, but there's a hose right there that goes from the water pump back around to the engine. There's another one buried underneath here that goes from the water pump back to the firewall area. There's another one back in the firewall area that's separate. And then he said there was one that goes from the throttle body to, maybe it's that one there. And then there are two heater hoses up in the front area. So I called the Fiero store, he walked me through. So I've got 6 hoses on order. So the fun never ends. We will go ahead and keep removing hoses since the system is out of coolant. Last thing I want is to have one obscure old original heater hose blow on me, or one of these other underhood ones that's seeing a lot of heat, and then have to go through the whole coolant flush thing again. So hose removal continues. On the other front, the belts. So let's see if I can, got a light. I have loosened the alternator tensioning or alternator holding bolt that you see right there. So right down there. Let's try loosening that one. Actually looks more feasible that is the pivot. So this should do it. So that was the correct bolt down there. And it was easy enough to get off with the deep well. I think it's a 15 millimeter. And then that allowed the belt to come off. So there are the belts. I'm still toying with the whole removing the AC compressor, but I need to focus on all of the heater hoses. So I'm back to that. I was hoping to free up some more space back in this area, and one of the things someone recommended was to disconnect the so-called dog bone, and then that would allow the whole engine to somehow tilt magically back. So I did. I pulled that out, and the engine moved like 1/8 of an inch. And when I tried yanking on it or prying on it in this area here, I really wasn't getting, I mean, it went 1/8 of an inch the wrong way, so it pulled away. So I've reconnected the dog bone. I got a long pry bar there. I stuck it in behind this plate and just pulled top there back to pry the engine rearward, and then was able to get the bolt to go through and got it snug back down again. So right now we're going to move on and find other heater hoses back in here. This would be one of them. All right, live and learn. Should have started by just taking the battery out. I'd already disconnected the positive and negative leads so that I could get them sort of out of the way. Removing the battery after that was just a single bolt, which had the hold down bracket. And once the battery was out, it was 2 screws. Loosen that one. That's a 7 millimeter, and then a 10 millimeter remove, and out comes the little protective shield. And then I just reinstalled that screw to hold its place. So with it out of the way, it frees up a whole lot of stuff. I can get in now and get that hose out. I have better access for that hose that runs back down there. And I can also see another hose buried underneath, which I'll probably have to get from the underside. But nonetheless, it did free up a lot of space. So that's a bonus. So this is that rear hose coming around. Sorry for the blinking. Oh, I know what it is. There we go. This was the hose that came off the backside, the back of the water pump, and then snaked around underneath here. And what makes me think, and people can chime in the comments if they know, the fact that this says inlet to, I can't really read that part, V6. This makes me believe that this is probably a factory hose. And then saying that, I found it odd, and maybe it's just because they had them lying around, that these hose clamps are not like the others. And added to that, that is a 1/4 inch hex, not metric. Whereas all of these other ones here used on larger hoses, that is metric. I think that's an M8. So, I don't know. Kind of conflicting information, but nonetheless, that one is out. And I want to see what left this and where that hose went. Unfortunately, it's kind of buried up in there, so we'll have to look at it from the bottom. Let's see if I can get some light on there. It came out of... Alright, so there is one too, and then it goes into something. It looks like it stays metal actually, and that's a shield that stays on it, so that would be good. I'm not going to worry about that then. We'll call that a metal hose, a metal tube. Right there is an end, but then further back, and I've seen it, it's back in there, the ends of those hoses, and so I can reach down in there with a socket, I believe, and get them loose. One of them is the end of this hose that comes off the water pump, and then I don't even know where the other end of that other one is. That could be the one that goes to the throttle body. So I had this thought. I didn't have air conditioning. You set it to air conditioning and it just blows the same temperature, doesn't change, doesn't get cold. So I went, removed this cap. That exposes a Schrader valve. I gave it a quick press and there was no pressure, nothing, no sound, nothing. So the system has a leak somewhere. So with that in mind, I decided to get rid of the extra weight in the back. This will probably be the only thing I take off, although I will kind of go back in there and see if I can find the other end of the pressure and return of the Freon hoses. And anyway, the way this worked was there was a bolt that went in and held a flange that had a fitting that had the two hoses, the inlet and outlet that go to the compressor. We'll call it low pressure, high pressure sides. After removing that bolt and removing these two connectors, I noticed that this one was already loose. That's the clutch one. So one of these screws, let's go with this long one here. Okay, yeah, this long one. That one fit in here and was used to retain that fitting. Only two of these that are used to hold the compressor to this mounting plate were in place, and they were just finger tight. So I guess vibration over the years, this one had fallen out, although it looks recent given the condition. This bolt and nut held it to a bracket that's mounted to the engine. That was holding it to a bracket, and then this bracket here was held to another mounting place with that screw. So I'm not going to make this go away. I may choose to, if nothing else, when I sell the car on at some point, and I'll include all this so that the new owner can retrofit a new R134 or whatever the the freon of the time is, they can have the right compressor for that. And then these are the clutch and so forth. As far as I know, that all still works. I mean, the compressor turns, not freely, but it turns. Anyway, that removes some weight. Let's get my scale and see if I can say how much it removed. We're looking at 16 pounds for the compressor and the hardware and the brackets. All right, so those two lines came out. A very long 10 millimeter, and I say that's the hex you need. It's not really the size of the screw. Down into through the fitting and into the mating for this hose assembly. So I took this out, for one, because I didn't know how to viably anchor down this end to keep it from flopping around, and two, with it out of that space between the front of the engine and the firewall, it frees up access to hoses up there. And yeah, I guess those are the two reasons. Third is weight. I mean, it doesn't weigh much. That's probably less than a pound. Here's where we're at. So there were two hoses back in there, one hose back under there. They're now over here with their new mates sitting with them. That one fits. That one looks good. This one, not quite. There we go. Not quite, but there's enough flexibility in this to bend it where it needs to be. I've got this little one here, which is the throttle body coolant line. And then I've got two under here. Let's see, there they are, there and there. Terminate up here. Underneath, they go into metal tubes that have come from the engine compartment. This is the heater, core, hot and cold side. So I'll take them loose from this end, match them up to these two, and then it's time for reassembly. All right, one thing I didn't mention, 3 of these 8 millimeter headed screws hold this panel in place. That is what it took to give me access to those. Upper and lower in. That grommet is there. The underside is pushed on, and the clamps are tightened just enough to kind of make them run flush with the rubber. So some compression, but not a lot. Yeah, I did have to take out the fluid reservoir, the washer fluid reservoir, just to get a better shot at that. I'll leave it out until I flush it, and not flush it until I put all the coolant in and burp it and all that other stuff, in case I find a leak. It's always the last one. That one was so difficult. The space between the end of the pipe and the fitting on the radiator was so close. It was hard. I had to really bend that hose. I'm hoping I didn't overstress the fitting on the radiator, or I'm gonna have to buy a new radiator, because that's plastic and you can't just braze it. Then all of a sudden things started to ooze. That's got me suspicious and feeling pessimistic, but we'll see. I did have to take that coolant overflow tank out of the way, because I couldn't work it from below. I had to work it from above. In order to do that, I had to remove the relay for the headlight motor so that I didn't drop the screw, because one of the screws faces down, sorta. Just a pain. Anyway, I am not going to put anything back until I make sure that nothing leaks. So let's tighten up those clamps down there. So the car is probably 8 to 10 inches higher in the back than the front. So this guarantees that the high spot is the thermostat housing. So I will verify, but I'm fairly certain that I start pouring coolant in here in the thermostat housing hole, listening for when it starts to overflow back here. When it does start to overflow here, I put the cap on there, then I keep filling the other end, and hopefully all the air just works itself out to the high spots and gone. We've got the heater core. At some point, I'm sure I'll have to turn the car on to get the water pump churning, but we'll get it to this far first. Everything's back together here. I did break the one-way valve, that's in the hose from the washer fluid pump, so it's being put back together, RTV'd. Car's been driven a little bit. Don't seem to have lost any coolant. That's a bonus. Don't see any puddles underneath. That's wonderful. Updated my toolbox with a new module. I don't think it's an ECM, but it's a module that sometimes burns out. It's in there, as well as the spare auxiliary belt. Now back here, everything is back together in the battery compartment. That barrier is in place. It's sort of a thermal barrier. As I mentioned before, there's no air conditioning compressor anymore, so there's no belt in there from the crank shaft end to the non-existent air conditioning compressor. I've got this protective panel in. So I decided I could access it right through that opening or back behind there. So I lowered it down on the wheels, and at first it did not want to spin, so I'm going to very gently see if I can get it with a pair of channel lock pliers and loosen it. Here is the speed sensor. I don't see any letters on it. The manual made it seem like there would be letters. They did, however, say that there were 2 lines. Let me get the page back here. All right, they did say there would be 2 lines, which I guess correspond to the 2 lines there. Although, again, I see no letters, just the word oil. So anyway, I'm going to put enough in, add enough to get it up to that line. Oh yeah, the manual says 5W30 is the oil you put in there. 5W30 engine oil. There's talk on the forums of something called synchromesh. If you're going to change the whole thing out, that makes sense, but I'm just going to put in hopefully no more than a quarter of a cup's worth. So I've got a syringe, a big syringe. I'll fill it, squirt it in there, and see where the level is. There's the hole down there that I can get access to with my syringe. I ended up putting in almost a cup worth, maybe a little bit more, which doesn't surprise me. It's probably the first time that's been out. So ended up pouring it into that cup and then using that syringe to inject it into that hole and keep from dripping all over. So it seemed to work just fine.